Welcome, everyone, to the No Bull Just Bacon podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Allan, and with me here today is my friend Andrew Coates to answer all of your burning health and fitness questions. Andrew is a personal trainer and host of the Lift Free and Die Hard podcast, which I highly recommend everyone check out.
And you've been a guest on multiple times.
I'm about to do my hat trick, actually, next week, I believe. So
Yep.
we're gonna be doing back-to-back podcast with some very great information here. He is a writer, having been published in T Nation, Men's Health, Muscle and Fitness, On It, Generation Iron, the PTDC, Pause for Breath, Barbend, Kabuki Strength, Elite FTS, Vigor Ground Fitness, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Pump Club. I wanted to get all those out to point out how great of a resource he is. Andrew is the co-founder of the Evolve Strength Business and Coaching Conference and public speaker at events all over North America. Thank you so much for joining me today, Andrew.
My pleasure. I appreciate the charitable introduction. And, I'll again reiterate how you've been a guest on my podcast a bunch of times, and your podcasts always do extraordinarily well, which is it speaks to the engagement from your community, having, gotten finally meet you in person at Real Coaches Summit. I know there's a lot of people that was like standing room only when you were in the main room when people wanted to see your presentation. So,
yeah,
great to be here.
I can't thank people enough for joining in on those, on those events and being able to see both of us talk actually at that one, and hopefully we can bring them some good information here today and keep people engaged, because I know that you've got a great audience as well. Today we will be talking about the role of parents' health habits in shaping their kids, understanding the status game that is social media, and the ideological battleground of fitness and nutrition.
We're going to do that. Okay,
we're going to talk about it. We're going to get into it. To start things off, in your opinion, how does a parent's relationship with their own body impact their child's self-image?
There's a ton of stuff. So first of all, big shout out to my parents. I wasn't in a position to understand how important this was probably until I was really deep into my career. And you get to see, I think we understand the statistics behind, or the influence behind, the food environment you grow up in, and that has a pretty profound effect on rates of adiposity, whether or not people work out, their activity levels, et cetera. So going back to my folks, they're still very active this day. Mom works out with her sisters. My dad goes for walks. He's had dogs over the years, many dogs. So that's a big part of his life. But we always had a lot of home cooked meals. Growing up in rural Newfoundland was sort of a weird advantage too. We walked to school a fair bit of the time, rode bikes to school. My parents encouraged us to be involved in music, which I didn't take too much. They both love music. I love listening to it, but they encouraged us to be involved in swimming. Again, I didn't take to it, but mom and dad are world-class swimmers. But they also got us involved in cross-country skiing, which I did very well at. I have provincial medals from that from when I was much younger. Nice. And then played every other sport under the sun, always outdoors. Me and my brother, one of my brothers, we played a lot of basketball growing up. And I've said this on other podcasts, so forgive me if someone's heard this, but mom was amazing, where she was a teacher at the local school, and we didn't always have a basketball coach. So mom would just stick around for a couple of extra hours and just do work. And me and my brother and our teammates would just play basketball in the gymnasium. So we got a lot of reps and hours just simply because of that. And then mom and dad would drive us to nearby communities for tournaments to play in. So they were great at creating this environment. And again, a lot of like nutritious home cooked food. So we had a really good environment growing up, me and my brothers. So that plays a big role. I tend to think of this through the lens of brain foggy today, and sometimes I'm not great at articulating things. I've got a post, and I know that's where you drew from, right? This is viral post that if I use it every once in a while, and it's about letting kids see you work out, because you're showing them what I think is normal. And I think you're normalizing environments like gyms. And there's always some sort of nutcase that comes in and screams, I'm like, no, they should be outdoors or whatever. That's a false dichotomy. Of course, kids should be outdoors. They're not doing it as much of that.
Right.
I spent a lot of time outdoors. I also played a lot of video games. I was good in school. I played sports. I think you can do it all, but I think the balance has probably shifted in the modern world we live in. But I've work with, and I'm sure you have, and any of the fitness professionals listening, and maybe the listeners who themselves are more the enthusiasts, if any of you guys found the gym as an adult, found fitness, found some sort of physical activity as an adult. But let's use the gym as both the literal, and then we can extend it into a metaphor. How many people have walked into a gym as an adult? Maybe you were already objectively overweight, or maybe you just didn't feel comfortable in your body and you had these preconceived notions about what a gym was with all these ripped and shredded, people that look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Bikini models, etc. And you were physically intimidated by going into the gym, or the trainers who've worked with tons of people who really nervous about stepping in the gym environment because they're preconceived notions.
And I think that anybody that's trained enough people can identify with what you're talking about, because this is an extremely common concern that people have. And maybe what you're getting to here is where they've started to formulate some of those concerns.
Yep. And I've been lucky in that kids have been allowed to come along with their parents or hang out physically in the gym that I contract out of. The old commercial gym, no, you have your kids club if you're lucky, but in this gym, and it's not like kids are or should be running around everywhere, swinging from everything, right? That's a nuisance and a hazard. But I've had multiple friends and clients who come in, their kids would like sit quietly, reading a book or what have you. But these kids, once they got into this environment, sometimes they would play a little bit. A couple of my best friends, they bring their kids in and we'd make forts out of the plyo boxes for them, and they had a great time. But these kids, I genuinely believe, if they may start working out and being involved in fitness at a younger age, and therefore it's pretty normal because their parents are modeling that behavior, whether or not they're physically in the gym environment, or B, these kids may end up in a gym a bit later in life. And then my hope is that this is a familiar, positive place that they remember being in, and less intimidating, more accessible, versus having no idea and therefore preconceived notions and a lot of intimidation. And I think that's a big, powerful thing. And yes, a lot of people will argue, well, my gym doesn't allow kids. Okay, cool. Physically, that's the case. Well, do you do what my parents did, which was get kids involved in a lot of other physical, healthy, active behaviors, which is going to put them ahead in life. I'm sorry. It's a huge advantage. There's so much good that comes out of it.
100%.
Or are you yourself just modeling that behavior and setting a boundary around it and showing the kids, okay, this is part of my life. This is really important. This is part of, healthy lifestyle. Because I think a lot of parents, and I'm not a parent, so I can't speak for parents, but we certainly see this culturally. I think we see this predominantly even more with women than with men. But once you have kids, your role, your cultural gender role is that of a caregiver, a parent. And therefore, you must put yourself last. And I think a lot of people are worried about being judged. There are shame triggers around the idea of, well, I need to also prioritize myself and my health when I'm a parent, because there theoretically can be some judgment and stigma from your social network or even family members based on archaic and outdated belief systems about, once you're a parent, then everything becomes about your kids.
Or about a job, because then you got to take care of the kids. And I think that this kind of bleeds into a really good question that that could help a lot of the people that are listening here. How do you coach parents who are trying to make these health changes, when they feel too busy or overwhelmed? And a lot of the times that feeling too busy can be exactly because of what you're talking about here. What they view as societal norms, even though it might not be accurate, or what they view as their duty, even though maybe some of the unintended consequences of, projecting the look that, we're too busy for health can really start to negatively affect kids in the future. How do you help them get through that hump?
I mean, again, you're working with anybody, you kind of have to know them individually. So it's always like the individual buttons that you push with them. But I think there's a little bit here. On one hand, I think we always have to think in terms of seasons of life. There are definitely some seasons that are more challenging than others. I just talked with a client of mine who does my online programs, and she's off track because her and her husband are literally packing up the house and moving. Okay. Now, that's also an event that doesn't happen very often. So I'm not super worried about that being a perpetual disruptor. But there's various iterations of this quote, but I think it's actually a good thing to start with as a framework. If you train yourself to stop when life gets busy, if you stop when life gets busy, then you will always train yourself to discontinue the healthy behaviors when life gets busy or stressful. And I don't know about the rest of you guys, but life, yes, we get these pockets where things calm down a little bit sometimes.
The,
But
the
generally
rare
speaking,
time.
we're
Yeah.
pretty good at filling our schedule, or other people fill our schedule with stuff. Unexpected stressors, things happen, demands on our time. And it becomes about carving out a boundary where this is non-negotiable and no matter
Hmm.
what is going on. And so a second part to that is we all know people who they're the busiest people ever. I mean, sometimes social media and the way we see things online may be a little bit different than reality, but we have enough data to see, okay, this person is busy, life, kids, career demands, etc. But they still have completely non-negotiable boundaries around workouts. And maybe they're doing 30-minute workouts in their basement. They've created an environment where they can do that, or there's something else built in the schedule and the system where this is part of their life. Now, a few
Hmm.
things. One, I think you scale that out over enough time, and I firmly believe this, those people have better physical and mental energy and stamina to do all the other things. Their moods are better. And I think they actually need less of that. And here's a narrative that I always try to combat. The person who stressful job, tired days, and then they come home and then, well, they're too tired for the gym or anything physically active. And in order to be able to deal with the work and the life, they need a couple of hours on the couch watching TV to decompress. And I mean, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with spending time in front of the television. I think that you got to take care of your physical well-being, and then if there's room left over, great. I also don't think that it's as restorative as people think it is. I mean,
I
it can
agree.
be to a degree, but what also ends up happening is how many times have people sat in front of the TV, but they're half paying attention, they're also scrolling on their phone, and you're getting these like, this virtual slot machine dopamine hit type stuff. That stuff and what it does for your nervous system is not restorative. It is not recuperative.
Mm-mm.
If you're doing it later in the evening, that's probably going to have a potentially negative effect on your sleep. And then all of a sudden the cycle perpetuates, right? So I think it's being aware of that. And it's not as simple as just getting a hold on it and saying, I'm never doing this stuff again. These devices are literally designed to be addictive, right? So there's some stuff there, but there's definitely some serious hijacking of your nervous system and your well-being. Now, let's go somewhere else with this. There will always be, and this can bleed into the ideological stuff that we talked about at the beginning. There will always be people who will scream at you. Any suggestion or hint about people needing to take personal responsibility for their choices. And yeah, we exist in an obesogenic environment where we have the largest companies in the world by market capitalization, that they're training the best minds in the world. You're using the best minds in the world to design systems to keep you hooked and on their platforms. Okay.
Hmm.
The game is rigged against you. We see the same sort of thing when it comes to food marketing and food engineering as well. Now, is that an argument to say, well, it's hopeless? And one of my big problems with some of these, I will call them ideological grifters, we have such low barrier to entry to our industry, which has a lot of benefits and a lot of cons.
There's no barrier to entry. That's one of the
None.
issues.
And unfortunately, and I do like for people to kind of identify this. Social media and the fitness industry is a giant status game. That's embedded, right? You can play it different ways, but there's a status game there. And we have people, the evidence-based people, you have these brilliant PhDs that we know and respect, and honestly, some of them are complete grifters. It's kind of funny when you see them, some of the good ones, like a Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple or a Dr. Tony Butaji or this various other ones, who will take the claims that these other PhDs are making and go, all right, this is why they're claiming this. This is
Mm.
rodent data. This is all based upon like some sort of mouse study that's, doesn't apply to humans. Here's a bunch of peer-reviewed research replicated that actually says otherwise and debunks the thing this PhD is claiming
In humans.
in humans,
Yeah.
which of course gets confusing. But even outside of that, we have people who have zero qualification in any way, shape, or form who will jump on various narratives. And one of many places this shows up is, they'll grab onto population statistics about and demographics that make it sound like it's pointless
Hmm.
to even try. It's pointless to try to lose weight. It's pointless to do this. It's pointless to do that. And I believe on a societal scale, if we want to challenge obesity rates and the metabolic health problems that we see, will we need social engineering in some way, shape, or form? There's a great book on this or about this nudge, Richard Thaler. And it talks about paternal libertarianism. Now, some people are going to hear those two words and lose their fucking minds. You'd have to understand what's going on here, but it's really about choice architecture. A simple example is if you are in a cafeteria, let's say a school cafeteria, and whether the bottles of water and the apples are a little higher in eye level on the counter versus lower versus the cookies, the bars, or the Pepsi or whatever, statistically, it actually has a fairly big impact on what people choose.
Mm-hmm.
And if you scale these things out over populations, we could actually make a big difference against the way that things are engineered. If you think about when you walk through a grocery store aisle, well, what is up near the counters? The again, it's the pop, it's the chocolate bars, all this sort of stuff. These convenient purchases.
It's
And
usually emotionally driven purchases.
absolutely. And there's a lot of marketing that goes into this, and there's a lot of money paid by the companies that sell this stuff to have the where it's placed. And we know that this drives buying behavior, right? So if you think about that in every environment you're in, whether it's healthy food, I mean, we think about it at home, whether or not there's a bowl of fruit on the counter or a jar of cookies on the counter, right? Like it overwhelmingly affects what people go to in that moment. So I think you want to use those kind of principles individually as best you can. It's your food environment. It's what you keep in the house. But unfortunately, across an entire population at scale, the only way we're probably going to ever change this, and there's powerful monetary incentives against making these changes, is to, and I don't have solutions here, but one of those things could be aggressive taxes on, let's call it junk food. And then you get into the what constitutes junk food and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. But then the ideological grifters will scream at you and be like, no, this is bad because food deserts and poor people and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's a weird narrative to think that, poor people just, I'm going to be careful what I say here. We know that food deserts exist, right? But my
I live in
theory,
one, actually.
so here's what I would love to see on a societal level. Right? And I've been saying this for a really long time, but on podcasts, but I never put it on social media because people lose their minds. Is I would love to see a 100% tax on everything that we would constitute as pretty much junk food. I mean, we're talking about the crappy shit at McDonald's. Now, yes, we know that there's like the salads at McDonald's are high calorie. That's where this starts to get blurry. Your chocolate bars, your chips, all this sort of stuff. Absolute ban on sales for any of this sort of stuff. And yeah, you can have an exception for Halloween candy once a year. And like, yes, okay, I get it, right? So you have to bake in some stuff. This is why it's probably too hard to implement. But I mean, an aggressive and predatory consumption tax on these type of things. And then with the revenue, because people are still going to buy this stuff. Right? And then of course people are like, oh, blah, 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 poor people. It's like, well, here's what we're trying to do. Because we also do know that people of lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to have higher rates of obesity, and they tend to eat more of this type of food, right? We know that. So one is you take the proceeds of that, and I would say 50% of it is actually goes into subsidizing better quality food in these food deserts. So there's better accessibility of the healthier stuff. And then the other 50% goes into healthcare straight up, which would actually like do a lot to help on that end of it, the reactive side of it. So that's something I would love to see as a social engineering thing to try to drive down the consumption of these high calorie food.
Not to cut you off completely here, but I actually think that there is almost a precedent set for this idea. Now, there are, as you acknowledge, there are going to be challenges because the question is going to be what constitutes, we would essentially call these a tax on ultra processed foods is essentially what it would be called. Then the problem is who identifies what an ultra processed food is, because technically something like whey protein is an ultra processed food, but it should not fall under the same umbrella because of the health effects of it. But we actually do have precedent for this. And what you're actually talking about is a shift in lifestyle. It's a lifestyle change as opposed to like a Band-Aid fix, like get rid of food dyes, which is not really going to do anything. It's not going to hurt, certainly, and that's fine. It's not going to move the needle. And so what you're talking about here, I actually I would be open to identifying this because I do think that there is a precedent. When we started aggressively doing PSAs against cigarettes, it worked.
Yes.
Nobody can argue that it didn't work. And people will say, and it's really funny because I've gotten in this conversation with people before, and I love the idea that you have here. The implementation is difficult, but I love the idea that you have here. And I think that if you could get people that are actually credible and not the concern that I have, especially in America these days, is that if this was instituted, some social media person would be put in charge of this instead of an expert.
Well, defining who's credible within
Right.
the US, we know
Yes.
that's a
Yeah.
problem. And
But
to further the point, I believe some years ago, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the state of New York. I may be mistaken on the exact details, but I believe it was the state of New York. And I think it was a Democrat. I'm Canadian, so like American politics, I'm not even interested in it. But it was a
it's like
Democrat
WWE.
led. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it actually very much is the way it plays out. A Democrat initiative was to put I think a soda tax, some sort of this very tax on soda. And it might have been something even more than that in the state of New York, I think it was. I don't think it was just a city. And it was then the opposing side, the Republican side of the spectrum, were completely opposed to it because I think on the grounds of freedoms, right? And if I'm not mistaken, so it got shut down. It never went anywhere, or it got revoked very quickly. Someone can fact check me on the exact nature of this. And then I think somewhat more recently, there was some suggestion by somebody on the Republican side of the spectrum about doing this sort of thing. And then the Democrats were opposed to it because then they use the argument about, oh, this disproportionately hurts poor people. It's like, you
Right.
know what disproportionately hurts poor people? Like
Diabetes.
diabetes,
Yeah.
right?
Because it is
Obesity rates.
socioeconomic status is a very big risk factor for diabetes.
Yeah, exactly. But then you have to get into the underpinnings of why that is. And I think this, if people will argue that if you make this cheap, shitty food more expensive, that it disproportionately hurts poor people. It's like, did you hear the part I said about the subsidizing the healthy stuff? That's actually a critical aspect of this stuff. You got to create better access. But the argument that poor people need more of this cheap, shitty food because it's quote cheaper and therefore they can get it. That's not an argument to defend access to it or having this cheap stuff, right? That's a ridiculous argument, and it's one of these distortions, these ideological grifters that just they want to fight about things and they choose an extreme position to be loud about. And back to that point, I've seen people. So another one of the things that I alluded to was again these demographics, and I've heard people. We know that the zip code you're born in the U.S. actually has a very big impact on socioeconomics and therefore metabolic health outcomes. We know that. But then if you wield that as, hey, there's no point, which I've seen from some of these type of people, but oddly enough, they seem to, within their messaging, they also tend to be like, the entire fitness industry is bad. Everybody else is bad, but I am uniquely virtuous. Listen to me. And what they're really saying is follow me, worship me. I am, righteous and good. Everybody else is bad. This messianic sort of like messaging, if you actually look beneath the surface of it. And meanwhile, and again, yes, we know that there are plenty of bad and bad faith actors that exist in our fitness industry, but we also know we're surrounded by a lot of really great, credible, ethical, highly educated, evidence-based people who genuinely want to make our world better. But we also know that extremism and loudness and sensationalism do play a little bit better at scale. And the way that social media algorithms now are maturing, we have Instagram and TikTok, which are two of the more popular platforms, and they all work this way. The user growth rate is dramatically slowing down. We have an explosion in the rate of content creation. AI is definitely going to be powering a significant amount of that, and it's only going in one direction. We have more advertising going into it because, again, they're more mature platforms. So these something like TikTok, certainly in Instagram, and Facebook's been doing this for a long time. They're no longer looking for pure growth for to create the network effect of a larger user base. They now have that locked in. So what they're trying to do is maximize the ratio of how much advertising can we show people before they will leave the platform, which TV and radio have done for years. It's at kind of 3 or 4 to 1. You get 45 to 48 minutes of television and 12 to 15 minutes of commercials between every hour. It's a very finely tuned science to know exactly what you can do before people get pissed off and just change platforms, right?
Have you
So
heard of
social media,
have you heard of the social media term for what's actually happening with things like Facebook and Instagram where they're shifting from there's something that was called the life cycle of social media. And this was actually a term that became, I think it was Merriam-Webster's Word of the Year in like 2021 or 2022, something like that. You can look it up. But have you ever heard of the exact term for this process?
I'm not sure.
It's
What is
called
it?
shitification.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's a
Okay.
very real term, and it talks about the life cycle of social media, and it's exactly what you're talking about
Mm,
here. Initially, when these platforms come out, they're about the relationship building, they're about the growth for the individual, they're all about the
mm,
user. And then over their lifespan, as they become more and more famous, they realize they
mm,
no longer have to treat the user well because they are
mm.
a part of life. And with the way that Meta works, they're an essential part of life for businesses.
Anybody who's
And
dealt with their customer service has had this experience. It's
oh,
non-existent, right? It's almost like airlines.
it's completely non-existent. And even if you have like the paid check, it's still non-existent. Because if you've ever contacted them, you're like, hey, I'm having this problem. They're like, sorry, we can't do anything about it. We're just a call center. And
Yeah.
all they do is they give you a link to a reference online to that you could
Mm,
have looked up yourself. But it's really funny because this enshittification process is it turns the thing into just an ad machine essentially.
mm,
And then people have to play the game to instead of being able to put out good content and
mm,
get followers and get seen, you have to play this game, this uh, you know the status thing that you're talking about here. And
mm.
so when we talk about this, do you think social media has made fitness more accessible, or is it just becoming more performative?
I mean, there's elements of both. So, for example, anecdotally, because again, the internet is not reality. Okay. We see stitch wars and just pure malevolence in our industry, which is again the status game where, okay, I'm going to sidetrack. Make sure you get me back around. You and I came up through the industry reading and consuming fitness media that was effectively gate kept.
Hmm.
Social media really wasn't a thing. So therefore, in order to be an authority in the industry, you had to be published on T Nation, bodybuilding.com, Men's Health, Muscle, Fitness.
Hmm.
There's certain other forums where, there's, some people rose to prominence literally on the bodybuilding.com or T Nation forums. Like
Hmm.
Lane Norton's, Allan Aragon's are a couple of good examples of that, but then they were both platformed within those entities, right? Certainly having high levels of education could open a lot of doors. There's certain professional networks like the old affiliate networks where everybody shared each other's email marketing stuff, which is very lucrative. But again, that's how some people got known. And that gatekept who we decided was an authority. You're reading Eric Cressy or Ben Bruno or Brett Contreras on T Nation, right? These people are the authorities.
Harlequin.
Poliquin, right? He's a big
Yeah.
OG, and again, some of these people were actually authentically working with Olympians, right? Poliquin he was really ahead of the curve. So now, with the gatekeepers no longer keeping those gates because you have social media, anybody who's very clever with video-based media now is kind of this big thing, who knows how to put together good hooks and what have you, can say stuff. And that does result in sometimes very smart evidence-based coaches who just have to be video savvy to do an incredible job with stuff. I mean, you've seen this with certain people who are really really ahead of the curve on YouTube early in, Jeff Nippards and your Omar Isufs. There's a number of others, but then you get loud, shrieky people who don't really have a lot of useful stuff to say, that just through loudness and performativeness. I mean, anybody now who walks through a grocery store aisle and is complaining
Oh
about some sort
God.
of food, cherry picking and stuff, and some of those people have enormous followings now because that stuff gets people's attention, right?
Hmm.
And it's very easy to demonize. Oh, this unhealthy sounding thing is unhealthy, therefore it is unhealthy. And Vani Hari, the food baby, she's one of the OG charlatans. She's sort of one of the people who pioneered that playbook, and then now it's just playing out with your you know, completely unqualified Muppet who just has a video camera and consistently does this and walks through Costco aisles. There's this one girl, and I really have to bite my tongue and not make ad hominems because there's something wrong with her. She'll like do these twirls and spins, and then she just picks out something. And I think I gotta believe half the people that follow her just follow her because there's just something genuinely wrong with this human being. And it's comical. Again, biting my tongue. I'm not going to say mean things, right? Get myself in trouble. But just if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking
I
about.
100% know who you're talking about. But the funny thing
Right.
is, with the way that social media works, it doesn't matter whether the interaction is good or bad. It all ends up being a net benefit for the
Mm.
person from a social media reach perspective, which is problematic.
Mm. So now get me back on track because I went sideways, but I felt that that was important. The original question, because
Do you feel
I
like
lost
fitness
it.
is, because of social media, is more accessible or more performative?
Right. So internet's not real life. When I am in gyms, and I spend a lot of time, I work out in gyms. Yes, I coach more and more of my clients in my home basement gym, but I still contract at a commercial gym. But I've spent a lot of hours in gyms for a very long time. The average user is definitely knows what they're doing more. And I kind of laugh because I'll preface this because the old dudes are still doing the same stupid shit that old dudes do, the ego lifting shit. And the young dudes, I mean, there's still a lot of like young dude bullshit, but on average, they seem to be smarter. And then there's a massive surge in the last 15, 20 years of women, older and younger, who
Hmm.
both are in gyms and really know what they're doing. And I don't think these younger women, especially now, the 20, 21-year-olds, they're not reading T Nation shit from like Brett Contreras from 10, 12 years ago for glute stuff. They're seeing, they might be following Brett on social media, but they're probably following this other litany of, female coaches and influencers who are doing booty based stuff. And a lot of that stuff, I mean, almost entirely originates from Brett at its source, whether or not the people who are doing it understand the layers of how far it traces back to Brett. He's not the only person to ever do glute stuff, but he did popularize, say, hip thrusting. But either way, I see a lot of this stuff and they know what they're doing. They're very smart. So on that front, I think I've seen plenty of anecdotal evidence to suggest that the average person knows more about what they're doing. There are more gyms locally than like massive explosion. I think there's a huge surge in that. But we're still also, there's a self-selection bias and a healthy user bias that I'm only seeing the people who self-select to that world, right? So I can't speak for the everybody else. And we're talking about the training gym side of stuff, not necessarily the nutrition side.
Hmm.
I do think we are seeing changes societally. I mean, we're seeing lowering of alcohol consumption, which I actually think is a very good proxy for a genuine concern for health and well-being. I think that's a really good one. But on the flip side, yeah, we see the platforming, an easy access of bad information. But I think that's also baked into human nature. And I don't know, this gets really ideological, but I don't even know if I'm comfortable with the idea of, from an authoritarian top down sense, deciding all of this information that no one can seem to agree on what is good and what is bad because the PhD authorities are literally arguing about this sort of stuff to ban all these things from the internet. And I remember recently there was this viral post about how China
I was going to bring that up when
is,
you mentioned this.
yeah. So I see all these people cheering that China had said they're banning people from talking about certain topics. I think maybe medicine law, there's might be a couple other ones, unless they have formal education in that. Now, and I see everybody cheering about this. I'm like, that's a really nice meme, but let's unpack it. First of all, what conditions need to be in place for that to work? You need a totalitarian or authoritarian regime government that has complete control and ability to censor, all forms of media, keep out all external forms of media, right? And how many countries in the world do that? Like North Korea, China, a handful of other ones.
Hmm.
So, there's part of your problem, okay? I don't want to live in a world that actually has the infrastructure to be able to do that in its purest sense. We already talked about how we can't get the experts to agree on what is actually fact-based and evidence-based. So who decides? And you alluded to earlier, like what governmental entity is in power that decides? I mean, I am not in the habit of going into like what's going on in US politics, but I kind of think that the current establishment, when it comes to the health and nutrition stuff, isn't necessarily consistently grounded in, I think, evidence-based practice. And there are a significant number of individuals in and adjacent to that have a demonstrated track record of pseudoscientific rhetoric.
Hmm.
That's all I want to say there. So you run with that and whatever. So is that the group of individuals you alluded to this earlier that we want deciding on what gets censored versus what is allowed to be platformed, right? Like you imagine Vani Hari, the food babe, being the person who gets to decide what nutrition information is allowed on the internet.
Well,
And
she kind of is right now because she is
which
actually she was part of that group that was
is
in
fucking horrifying,
she was in
right?
that group
It's
that was in Washington D.C. When I saw that, I was like, this can't be real. Like
and I
we're
mean,
literally choosing people entirely based off of follower count rather than anything else.
and again, this next thing, and there's a I'm going to butcher it, and I'm going to Jordan Peterson said this, and there are going to be certain people like, yeah, Jordan Peterson. And some people are going to be like, fuck, like set aside your emotional reaction, like forget the messenger, like absorb the meaning of the message here. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something to the effect about I may trust you and your intentions in terms of someone seeking some sort of political or controller power.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't trust the person standing behind you with the gun to take it over. And we've seen this play out in the world. And if you build authoritarian censorship infrastructure, it may be at the current time in the hands of noble, good, evidence-based people. But what happens during election cycles, if you build all that stuff, and then all of a sudden the next crowd that comes in and uses it for evil, and an extreme example, but a very real one, and what Peterson was more or less talking about was the communistic machine that was Russia. And Lenin was not a particularly wonderful human being. There were horrors and abuses and what have you. But who came after Lenin? Vladimir Lenin. Do you remember?
I don't remember who came after Lenin.
Joseph Stalin.
Oh, Stalin, right? Yeah.
And Stalin was orders of magnitude more malevolent than Lenin was, right? So, anyway, I think it's still an analogy for this sort of stuff. And it goes back to, again, in a perfect world, if we all agreed upon what was information versus misinformation, a lot of people are very ideological, think, well, this here, this tribal belief system is all evidence-based and everything else is bad. It's like, that's usually not the case. I found that both sides of the ideological aisle tend to have their senses for unscientific rhetoric. They just tend to show up in different domains. Do I think one side is on average better than the other? I find on average, absolutely. But it's not to say that I would unilaterally agree with one side of this coin and the other side I think is entirely wrong. It just depends on the domain.
Yeah, and I think that this is what you've set up is really the crux of the issue with helping to control this type of thing. Because even if this gets established and it's under good care to begin with, it's almost an inevitability that at some point down the road it's going to be hijacked by. I mean, you can't. There's no way to assure that you are in perpetuity going to have people doing the right thing when. I mean, if you look at the wellness industry itself, the wellness industry is in its entirety is a larger industry by a magnitude of like 4 or 5 times than the pharmaceutical industry. And this blows people's minds. Now, I'm not talking just about supplements. I'm talking about the entire wellness industry. But if we're thinking that this is the industry that has, it's completely positive and it's always looking out for your health and wellness, I can't say that it is.
But it's a wonderful illustration. So there's a couple of points here. One, we know that the wellness industry is full of grifters. It's not to say that everybody's bad or every product's bad, but we have an enormous number of grifters. It's no barrier to entry to get in there. And they sell a lot of dubious things. There's a lot
look at the longevity.
fraud.
Look at the longevity space in particular. Almost everything sold in the longevity space is it has zero scientific backing for practical outcomes because it's almost impossible to study that type of thing. But people are
Now,
just soaking this up.
Now let's flip it. So let's use the contrast of the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry is highly regulated, sure. It has given us things like insulin. It has given us proven and safe and effective vaccines like the MMR vaccine and the polio vaccine, right? And there are numerous other. I mean, they are who took, a peptide, the GLP-1 agonist stuff, and then turn that into possibly one of the most impactful medical advances that we're going to see against what we're dealing with the obesity and the metabolic health issues that we're seeing in our society. very, very effective. And you still have the people who are screaming bloody murder that this is some bad thing, or have a moral position because all of a sudden now they're afraid that their only redeeming quality is the fact that they're lean and they look fit. And all of a sudden they're fearful that that will be watered down because everybody else will have access to something that they thought was, uniquely virtuous. But that's a different tangent. But we also do know that the pharmaceutical industry has its dark side, and it has been, I mean, one of the most sued industries in certainly North America. They produce OxyContin amongst other things, right? So it's got its fair share of dirty black marks on it. There's lots of other things that are contained within. Do I think its net impact is overwhelmingly good? Yes, but it's also, a cautionary tale that not everything that comes out of there is evidence-based or good, or doesn't cause any harm. And it just can't be an argument to say, well, regulation solves all these things. I don't have the answer. I don't think that the answer is do nothing. I don't think that's the answer at all. I'm not advocating for that. But top-down authoritarian control and censorship also isn't the answer either without some serious guardrails. So anyway, people can take from what they will. And one of the problems with these sort of discussions is I'm very careful with my language because I find, and this goes back into the ideological stuff with the industry, I never discuss politics or socio-political stuff on my social media because you say one thing and then people will assign you to a tribal ideology because people tend to be very predictable with their tribal belief system. And they'll assign me to a tribe. Oh, your audio's gone, my friend.
People view everything as black and white. And so if you say one thing, and it's really funny for people, particularly for non-Americans, I feel, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I think that the problem with American politics is that because we are a two-party system, which I'm completely against, by the way, and I'm sorry if anybody gets offended by that, but please let me explain. What you're getting at, if you take a stance, and I try to avoid politics as well. I rarely post anything political. I don't know if I ever have, but I try to stay away from that because I don't want to deal with it. Two, who cares what my political ideation is? It doesn't matter because my entire purpose is to spread health and fitness, and that I feel like that's similar to yours, right? We're not here to spread politics. But the issue that people have is they assume if you have a stance that is traditionally seen as one side of the aisle, then all of your stances are that side of the aisle.
Yes.
And I think for non-Americans, that's almost a very weird thing to experience because things should be more gray. It doesn't necessarily mean that you think that everything should be like this. It's that one particular topic. You have this opinion because X. The problem in America, maybe it's this way in Canada, but in the United States, the issue is that people build their entire identities around the type of nutrition that they do, the religion that they have, the political ideation that they have. And I don't know if it's an overall intelligence thing in the United States or what's really going on, but it's almost like we can't fathom that somebody might agree with one side, this side on this topic, and then this side on this topic. And for me, you made fun of libertarian. You brought up the idea about libertarians earlier. I am actually a libertarian, but I'm not like an anarchical libertarian. I believe that the government should assure healthcare, infrastructure, defense. There are certain things that I want the government to have power in, and I believe that we should be taxed so it can go to education, so it can go to certain things that will promote overall welfare and then stay out of social structures. I don't care, what a person's sexual preference is. I don't care what, they do that does not affect me. It doesn't matter to me. And so if it's not my business, stay out of it. Being able to drive on the road and being able to go to the hospital is my business because that's something that I engage in. And I think that everybody should benefit from these types of things. But it's funny to me, feeling kind of like a disenfranchised third party person, because and for people that don't like libertarians, I want to say there's lots of flavors of libertarians, and maybe you should look into that before saying, because there are some that I completely disagree with. And so it's funny to see this black and white ideology bleed into other aspects of our lives, including health and fitness. And it's like, well, if you don't agree with Maha on this, then you must be opposed to Maha on everything. And
here's one of the grifts, and I will.
Here we go.
Drives me nuts. is when people say that, okay, so one side of it is, and I'm on this side, it's that I'm not interested in much, if any, political, socio-political rhetoric from fitness professionals. I'm not interested in it. Okay, I'm
Neither
going to
am
go
I.
back to that in a second. But then there's people who will scream at you, and these are not great people. That it's inherently political. You know what that is? It's a bully narrative because what those people want, and this is something I see from the ideological grifters, is they want to bully you into either adopting their tribal ideology or pressure you into making loud public statements in support of their tribal ideology. They do not care about you. They do not care about you. They are status seeking people. And this is something you alluded to. If someone's entire identity is wrapped up in their political belief system, that's not someone I'd really trust or want to have in my immediate orbit.
How
Big
how
critics,
objective
right?
how objective are they?
They're not, right?
Right.
And I find that a lot of people, they don't have any independent thought for themselves. And this exists in nutrition, this exists in some aspects of fitness, but they've downloaded and outsourced the entire tribal ideology without actually understanding most of its tenets. And then they spout it. But I'm just always very wary of people who will scream at you that, and then of course they'll come back and be like, "Oh, you're privileged to be able to say that." No, that's just another part of the bully narrative. It's complete rubbish. It's nonsense. It's trying to pressure people into either saying the performative thing to go along with whatever narrative it is, and both sides do this to different degrees. And if you don't, part of it is then you become a target for them to build status by attacking you, publicly shaming you and attacking you. So that way they build status within the tribe that actually enforces the tribal ideology. And you are therefore someone who's outside of that. And it creates an artificial us versus them dynamic. Now, again, we're getting ultra political here. But okay.
Which is really funny since neither of us, I don't think that I've ever seen you get political in like any of your social media content. And people can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that I ever have either, which is
I've never seen it. No.
It's kind of interesting that we've kind of gone down this route and people are finally hearing a little bit of what we think.
And I'm sure that I've confused the living hell out of people, in terms of like where I stand. Well, that's just it. I tend to be nuanced issue by issue. I evaluate things based upon the evidence. I try to sift through it. And so here's another important point. There are people in our industry who are possessed of such an uncontrollable narcissism. And we wave that word around too much, but I will use it deliberately here. That when something bigger in the world is going on, that they can't sit it out. They don't like the fact that the attention is off them. So therefore they insert themselves into whatever political narrative, whatever complex geopolitical thing is going on, whatever social thing is happening. And they need to be forefront in it. And one of the ways that they do that is they're loud on their social media. I tend to actually sit quietly. When something kind of bigger is going on, I tend to sit quietly. I don't insert myself into it.
And
furthermore, yes, it absolutely is 100%. And if you recognize, you start to understand what's going on there, you're like, oh, because some of the loudest voices I've seen in our world are adjacent who prattle on about these type of issues. Mm-hmm. I see right through them. They're very performative. They're very insincere. They're very malicious. I find that there's something really nasty in them. And this is both sides of the tribal ideologies. And I'm just not interested in stuff. And furthermore, it's only happened to me once, but I've seen this to happen to other people where someone pops up and demands to know. Someone I don't know, never interacted with. We don't have that kind of social relationship. Demands to know what my position is on some sort of complex issue. And again, I'll say, I think it's a more narcissistic trait to always. And I'm not saying every single instance. It's just the people who consistently and always do it. And so you can kind of tell when you see it. So there's it. If someone demands that you must say something about it, well, first of all, you haven't earned that right to demand that of me. Two, we're not close friends. I barely even know you. So therefore, these are the sort of things that I think can happen in private, nuanced conversations. And I'm not interested in performing for the audience to say the approved thing on social media for attention. And here's another thought. Me and so many the rest of our world are, and I don't like the word expert, but I'll use it in this context. We are experts in fitness and nutrition. We are not experts in politics or complex geopolitical, social, ideological things. And therefore, there's no value in my opinion on that, right? There's only downside. Now, I'm going to go even further with this stuff. And one of the reasons why I push back very aggressively at any suggestion that I'm supposed to dance performatively for those type of crowds or mobs, or to avoid, the condemnation from some of that mob. Up until about maybe a generation and a half ago, we can go back a little further. Most of the people in the world, the news, the things that you heard about in the world, let's say even like Vietnam was when it kind of changed, where like the news tended to cover what was going on in the world in a slightly more real time sense, not the same way it is social media. But World War II, a lot of the updates people were getting, there were significant delays. There was a lot of government filtering and even propaganda as to exactly the course of everything. And it actually shifted during the Vietnam War, where the government and news media sort of like try to control the narrative. But if you get into the history of the Vietnam War, you'll actually kind of see how it turned. But certainly in modern conflict with social media, we're seeing far more in real time. And a lot of modern war is being played out as a battle for the moral high ground and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, played out via social media. And you actually get a lot of propaganda within that. You have to kind of approach it a little bit carefully here. But we are also now seeing every real-time horror in the world. And guess what? The world was always awful. And here's what some people don't like is objectively, we're probably living in one of the best times in human history. However, there's still bad stuff. But the world was worse, much, much, much worse. And the human psyche was never meant to be drowned in a steady stream of outrage. And the type of people with an ideological agenda and a status game that they're playing who are screaming at you to be and to hijack your emotional well-being and have you care about 250 different complex but existentially important issues all at the same time.
That are being presented as very black and white topics, by the way.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what we started with. You've got the young parent who's already not getting enough sleep, the person who's trying to, make ends meet. We have, the last few years, inflation and cost of living has been kind of a little bit out of hand. Life is not necessarily that easy. And if you outsource your emotional well-being to a group of people that do not care about you and want you to be 100% invested in their particular cause, and it's not to diminish the fact that some of these things are genuinely horrible and real, but there's almost nothing you could do individually to actually like change some of the legitimate human suffering that's going on in every other corner of the globe. And if you are so hijacked emotionally that your own mental health is effectively ruined. I mean, what's the percentage now of younger people whose mental health diagnosis is a core part of their identity, right? This is some sort of like outrageous statistic. And that's a complex thing. But you don't think that being pressured into like really high level caring and wringing your soul over everything that's wrong in the world isn't feeding into that thing, and access to all this information in real time via social media things that even when I was growing up, we'd see the evening news and what they chose to show us.
But then you can get away from it for the rest of the day.
You can get away from it, right? And then I'm running around and playing sports and GI Joes and video games and studying for school and riding my bike and snowmobiles and all the other cool shit that I did as a kid. And I think it's harder. I understand why rates of anxiety and depression are much higher in younger people today than they were, even when I grew up. And I know we're running all sorts of different places here, and this is probably not your normal fitness podcast, but I actually kind of want people to like zoom out a little bit and see the forest on this and go, wow. I mean, because all the stuff we're talking about has it's around us, it's everywhere. It has a profound impact on our nervous system, our emotional well-being. I want you guys to be, just to think about the motives of all of the talking heads and the status-seeking figures that are in these worlds, especially the ones that you agree with. Because you think, oh, the ones that you agree with are virtuous and good, and they care about the things that I care about. Maybe. Or maybe their agenda is to manipulate and use you because they just happen to have sit on this, you guys agree on what is the moral high ground on a particular issue. And that could be nutrition. It could be some of the training ideological background battlegrounds that we see, because there are fierce battles when it comes to muscular hypertrophy and physical therapy and all sorts of other stuff. Certainly, nutrition has been a war zone for a long time.
Well,
It,
this is
it
actually a great segue. And this is you're leading into where I was going to talk about going next because you called fitness and nutrition a battleground.
mm,
Give me some insight into why you think that because we've been talking about the macro scale, you know, the health landscape in the countries, the health landscape in the social media purview these days. Let's bring that down into fitness and nutrition and why that has become a battleground for people's
mm.
attention, for understanding. What do you think there?
Okay, so let's go to nutrition first. I think one of the things that the evidence-based community did poorly for a little while in science communication is to defend ultra processed foods. Okay. Now you alluded to earlier, oh, well, wait, yes, okay. We absolutely know that certain things are technically highly processed or what have you. But these are not whey protein is not the problem here. It's the junk food. And then there's a moral policing over calling food junk food or shit food or not clean or whatever. And that's actually kind of part of the problem. Yes, on one hand, it is really important that we have people understand that it is calories in, calories out, that the that underpins everything. But the quality of food has a massive impact on our health and well-being. And for a while there, some of the evidence-based crowd got really out of hand defending ultra-processed food in a very, very technical sense. So what did that lead to? A pendulum swing on the other side, and you get and I'm going to say it, idiots like Eddie Abu and these other morons that are walking through grocery store aisles or Paul Saladino, and then saying that oatmeal or spinach are somehow bad for you, or David Asprey, or there's any number of these clowns.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? When someone with a PhD is saying that, oh, ultra processed food is perfectly healthy, then someone goes, it's the midwit graphic. It's like where there's the Neanderthal type dumbass on the left, and then there's the person at the hump in the middle who thinks they're really smart and they're really complicating things, and then there's like the ninja character on the right, and the right and the left generally agree on almost all these things. Well, it's the person on the left. But they can see right through the claim that, oh, ultra processed foods are like, oh, healthy and there's nothing wrong with them, right? Even if you equate for calories. And so what did that leave the door open for? All these people that with a cell phone walk through a grocery store aisle have no qualification or anything else, but then the lens of what we talked about in terms of status seeking and what have you is underpinning all this stuff. You have to understand their motives. But guess what? It gave them and again, the gatekeepers are no longer there. You have social media, you have interest-based algorithms that just push out the most sensational stuff. And then we have fertile ground for these people to gain incredible status and following because they're basically turning around and going, look at this ingredient list on this thing, this shit. Look at this shit. Don't eat this shit.
I can't pronounce this word.
Which is Vani Hari, the food babe's old play. Like that originated with her more or less like 20 years ago, right? Just before social media allowed her to get very viral. But I understand why we have this thing. And for the average person, when you have one person saying, oh, ultra processed foods are fine. I'm oversimplifying, but effectively that was a message. And the other person is saying, don't eat this shit. Well, which one seems like they care more about you and which one seems like they're more honest? It's easy to understand. And then the PhDs fight with these people, whatever. And then you get into some like, pedantery or what have you. But I think more and more people start seeing through the bullshit because then all of a sudden, one of these people, they start selling alternatives to things that they're demonizing on their website, and it's no better, right?
Yeah.
And then there's gaps in education. That's a different topic. So you go over into the hypertrophy space. So we have this weird war zone right now where it's low volume, high intensity training versus the higher volume stuff. And
this is always an exhausting conversation, by the way.
It's ludicrous. So on one hand, you have the PhD tier. Now, again, it's not like that PhD tier is completely flawless, but you have this sort of highly educated tier who traditionally, I think, have more or less moved with where the evidence has sort of taken them. And then you, on the other side, and it's not entirely, but there are a number of individuals who have no formal education whatsoever. They're lifters for a really long time. And then they say very, serious and absolute things. There's a claim. I want to be careful not to straw man this, but I'll give you guys an illustration of this. I saw a post a while back, and it's some figure, and I've seen this character being criticized for bad takes on other. Here's a red flag: if you have someone wandering wildly, interpreting research on many, many, many different things, and they don't have a strong educational background, even sometimes if they do. And now I'm saying this because here I am talking to one of the people I find actually
Who does
does
this?
speak on.
Oh no,
And,
I don't take anything personally. You can go where you go.
you, in my experience, reliably and with nuance, can speak on a slightly broader array of scientific-based topics because you actually know how to read and interpret research. I know that, right? So sure, but there's lots of other people who it often can be a red flag if you have people like. There's lots of famous PhDs. I'll use Neil deGrasse Tyson as an example, right? The guy's a brilliant astrophysicist, but have you ever heard him talk about nutrition? This is a smart man with charisma who speaks with grand authority and people trust him. And I've seen him say demonstrably false and unscientific things about nutrition. Mm-hmm. But I know to recognize it. Most people don't. So they're going to take him at face value. So back to this post I saw. And I don't know the research study. I mean, number one, there are a lot of problems with the quality of research in strength and conditioning. It's a new field. A lot of it's pretty mediocre, I'll be honest. But he made the claim, and I'm going to hopefully not strawman this, that it is less fatiguing to do 20 near 1 rep max sets of squats than it is, less fatiguing than it is to do 1 set of leg extensions of 20 reps. Now, when I read something stupid like that, I know this person is, I mean, there's different ways we define fatigue.
I remember when this quote came out, and it was something that somebody sent me in like Q&A of my.
It's nonsense. I'm sorry. It's complete nonsense. So number one, a lot of times when you see these people talking about muscular hypertrophy and on the internet, they don't actually coach real people. They haven't trained anybody in person. If they ever have, they haven't done it in years. They're completely removed from the real experience of actually coaching people. But two, they've never done this. I mean, just picture this now. Again, in order to elicit hypertrophic effects, whatever set you're doing, you have to go to pretty close to failure. We have pretty good research on this that as long as you're within, I mean, I think the true interpretation is probably between 5 reps of failure, but because people are not necessarily great at it, we usually say probably within 2 reps of failure on a set. And it doesn't matter the general rep range, right? There are certain caveats to it. It's got to be more than 30% of a 1 rep max, because if it's so light, like I curl a pen for a few hours, I can't reach failure with it. It's not going to be a hypertrophic stimulus. And yes, if you get into like that 1 rep max type territory, despite the actual like issues with trying to do that many reps and like how rough it is on the joints and how actually fatiguing it is, because it is fatiguing, right? This whole narrative that heavy weight, lower repetitions is less fatiguing than high rep stuff. It's a misinterpretation of bad research. I'm sorry. I'm not even interested in entertaining it because I know what the experience is after training for a really long time, right? Or, again, maybe there's like different measures of fatigue, but anyway, the suggestion that, okay, first of all, just think about this. Like, how long would it take and how rough would it be on your joints to do 20 sets of one, but that's nearly at near failure, which means that if you're near failure, the load has to be very, very heavy. So whenever even someone who claims that you don't need to do more than 4 to 6 reps for hypertrophy, there's so many problems with that statement. And I've seen it said as an absolute. Because again, it's clearly implied that you have to be near failure. Number one, it doesn't work for beginners at all. Okay. It doesn't work with anybody who's got, some injury history, like tricky joints when it comes to the movement pattern. It doesn't work for older adults, right? It doesn't work for almost anybody other than maybe for a period of time. Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I got to take off my headphones. I had an interruption there. It might work for, some of the younger bro crowd for a little while. Okay. Or honestly, it may work for shorter lifters with more dense musculature across shorter limb lengths, but I don't think it works very well for taller lifters. It also may work for certain compound exercises, but it sure doesn't work for the isolations that have to be done across a longer lever, like a side lateral or a leg extension or what have you, right? So the overwhelming majority of cases, that particular claim doesn't work out in practice. But anyway, yeah, the going back to this 20 sets. I mean, first of all, the amount of time it would take to do 20 near max sets of squats. I mean, it's such a ridiculous false dichotomy and sensationalist claim anyway. It's nonsense on its face versus like I've sat down and I've done a 20 rep set of leg extensions to near failure. It sucks.
Hmm.
It's not fun. It burns. It's awful. But guess what? I'll sign up for that any day over actually having to do 20 single 1 rep max squats. It's
I mean, those
nuts.
20 single 1 rep max squats, if you're getting adequate rest in between the sets, I mean, you're looking at
2 hours.
3 to 5 minutes at minimum. And then probably after you've gotten into a few sets, you're probably at 5 plus. I mean, because it's gonna take forever to recover from that.
Yep. So I mean, it's a ridiculous and sensational claim and post anyway. And I know it's like just trying to like illustrate some point that showed up in some research study, which I didn't see, but I can assume it's half nonsense. I'm sorry. Like I should actually look at it and read the abstract and then read through the entire thing and evaluate it based on its merits and how many people are in the study and its duration,
I,
all these other sort of things.
from
But
my understanding, this wasn't actually even based on a study. I think that this was just a claim.
yeah, and I can just take that claim on its face and go, "This nonsense." I'm sorry,
Right.
but I mean, this is the stuff that's running around masquerading as hypertrophy science on the internet. And while that's a bit of an extreme one, there's tons of this other stuff. And again, people speaking in absolutes. I was talking. I had. I'm trying to remember who I had on the podcast recently, but we were talking about how they had Brad Schoenfeld on their podcast, and I also had him as well. And instead of being able to pin Brad down to make anything as a firm absolute claim, Brad always spoke in nuance and
Hmm.
context and hedged what he was saying. And that's generally the sign of someone who has a better and deeper, more credible understanding of, hypertrophy research. And with Brad, Brad has, I've seen over time, I mean, number one is he's doing some of the research, but he's also shifted his beliefs with where the evidence has gone. And I've seen people will straw man and make claims about like stuff that Brad has said before and blah, blah, blah. Now he's saying something different. It's like, that's what happens when you are the researcher credibly in that space and you move with how the evidence changes things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the sign that you're a good coach.
Yeah.
I will challenge anybody to find me a coach that hasn't changed their ideas about something. If they've been practicing long enough, I mean, in 10 years, data changes. And just because something works doesn't mean it works optimally or doesn't mean that you are succeeding in spite of it. And I mean, these are the kind of things that we see all the time in fitness and nutrition. I mean, you know, we'll get people with intermittent fasting is a good example. Intermittent fasting 10 years ago was promoted as all of these health benefits and all these other things. And then we found out none of these health benefits actually pan out. It had nothing to do with intermittent fasting. But the people that were doing intermittent fasting were seeing really good results. And the people that are doing intermittent fasting seeing really good results is because they were controlling their calorie intake. It had nothing to do with the fasting itself. The fasting window made no difference. And so it's just because somebody could say, I did this and it worked really well, doesn't mean that it was because of it. It was because of something else, and we just didn't have the information to identify what it was at that point. And so
There's
if you don't change this thought process as you move forward, you're probably being a disingenuous coach is probably a strong saying
mhm.
for it, but you're at least not a self-aware coach.
The fasting one is a great example. So from the coaching standpoint, the people who kind of built brand around the idea of intermittent fasting, well, if you jump on this, like the preliminary research and some of the belief system around it, right? Because the bodybuilding community really thought, okay, training fasted is sort of a adjacency to that, but they would see better results with, you know, it- training fasted cardio in the mornings. And then there was some mechanistic stuff that, yeah, you get better fat mobilization there, but it's more than offset across the rest of the day. So that
Right.
the net effect is neutral, right? But they grab onto like the cherry picked mechanistic data as opposed to understanding the what happens. But within the bodybuilding realm, especially the drug The non-tested realm, well, one thing that's really good at preserving muscle when you are, in a low calorie state or a fasted state is anabolic drugs, right? So that actually, there's an extra reason why fasted cardio is actually kind of popular that realm because they have an advantage in there. Okay, so back to intermittent fasting. For anybody who's really built a brand, an identity around a particular nutrition ideology, and then if there's evidence against the claims that originally you had, well, people often tend to double down. They're kind of like the cultists, the doomsday cultists, where they pick a certain date, right? And it's like, oh, the spaceship's going to come. Like this is very well documented.
The Mayan calendar has ended.
Yeah, and there's one of these again recently, but what they study this, they study the devotees, and you'd think, okay, well, the spaceship doesn't come, the end of the world doesn't happen, and then you'd think that it would shatter these people's beliefs, but apparently they become more fervent in the belief system, and they go out and evangelize more, and actually deepens their faith, and that they think that, well, something that they did and their faith actually staved off the apocalypse, so therefore let's go evangelize it even more. But anyway, something about, your claims about nutrition being debunked seems to harden people, and they double down on it, and big pharma and big food and the science is all bought off and blah blah blah. Those are some of the narratives, but at some level they've attached your identity to it, so therefore it requires a great deal of cognitive dissonance in order to ignore the evidence and just continue to double down on. But a lot of it then it just becomes a tribal belief system, as opposed to, so it ties back to what we said before. Now, for the end user, there's something similar. It's the person who believes in it that you said, who like has had great results on it. Well, they can misattribute the cause, and instead of understanding it's always the calorie, or usually what it really is just a system that really works for you. It's a framework that actually allows you to consistently do it. The person who doesn't eat in the first portion of the day and their energy levels are generally fine, and it's a little easier for their schedule, and they eat later and they get to kind of eat, higher volumes of food and maybe some higher calorie stuff, but they're meets their calorie needs, and they like feel great doing it this way. Well, it's like, oh, look, this is evidence that intermittent fasting is superior. It's like, no, it really just works for you. Great, all the power to you. I don't want to take this thing away from you, but what they do is then they tend to evangelize to everybody else. Everybody's had the experience of a recently newly adopted keto dieter, and what do? Is they tend to aggressively evangelize how wonderful this thing is. Well, why do they do that?
Look at this weight loss in the first month.
Well, that's part of it, but there's something else going on here. And again, any trainer who's had a client who starts like, what do you think about keto? I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning. They're already doing keto. Why? Because some family member, some cousin, or some coworker is like evangelizing keto. But why do they do it? Because of an insecure belief. And they want to strengthen
reinforcement.
The belief,
yep.
Reinforce the belief by having other people sort of adopt it here, because their own belief is a little bit shaky in the early going, right? So it's fun to kind of be on the alert with this sort of stuff. And again, every coach has had this exact experience. And I think you're running out of time here. So
I am. And I wanted you to get done with that thought, because I think that that's a really good place to wrap this up. I mean, the big takeaway in this last part that we were discussing is being open and objective about some of these things. And just because, Andrew is educating you on some things, I'm educating you on some things on social media, doesn't mean that we're saying that you have to stop doing what you're doing if you really like doing what you're doing. I mean, intermittent fasting is a great example. I use intermittent fasting with my clients. I explain to them from the start, if in this day you feel like eating earlier, eat earlier. It's fine. If like every once in a while you want to do this, but we have the conversation. Will this eating pattern be something that brings something to your life? Do you enjoy eating this way? Does it give you the ability and control to be able to handle this? And if it's something that has no distinct negatives, given your goals and your lifestyle and your preferences, certainly do that. But we don't have to lie about why some of these things work or make false promises. You can be objective. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. Feeling like a loss of competency because we might have been wrong in what we thought originally is a big thing, and it's a self-defense mechanism, which is what you were bringing up, I think is a very real thing. But you're going to have all these different tools, and you can use whatever tool works for you. That doesn't mean that you have to push false narratives. And I think that what you were pointing out there was very, very, very relevant and helpful for people to be able to grow in future health and fitness knowledge. Now, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise, Andrew. Where can people find you online?
All roads go through Instagram at Andrew Coates Fitness. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, I've been putting a lot of work into the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. You were on not terribly long ago. You'll be back very soon, depending on when this is released. And you're always a very nuanced, well-spoken guest. So I look forward to that. And anybody who is listening to this from my media, go dive into more what Allan's doing. As I said earlier, you're one of the rare individuals that I find can treat with nuance and evidence and interpret it well a slightly broader array of things in exercise science, in nutrition, and treat it well. And I trust your judgment on these things.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks everyone else for joining us on another episode of No Bull, Just Bacon. Make sure to give Andrew and myself a follow for more daily fitness information, and we will see you next time.